Sarah stood frozen in the doorway of their bedroom, pink frosting still wet on her fingertips from decorating her daughter's birthday cake, watching her husband Mark's phone screen illuminate with a message that began, "Can't wait to see you tonight, my love." But tonight was Emma's 7th birthday party. Tonight was supposed to be about family, about the little girl downstairs who had spent the morning arranging her stuffed animals in a circle because she wanted everyone to celebrate together. And yet, here was the truth Sarah had felt creeping into their marriage for months, confirmed in glowing pixels in a stranger's words. She didn't scream, didn't throw anything, didn't even cry. Instead, she carefully wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, took one long look at the man sleeping peacefully in their bed after his exhausting work week, and walked back downstairs where the birthday banner she'd hung at dawn still read "Happy Birthday, Emma" in letters she'd painted by hand, each one a labor of love, from a mother who had always believed that protecting her daughter's joy was her greatest calling. And she decided in that moment that Emma would have the perfect birthday party, that her daughter would blow out her candles and open her presents and laugh with her friends. And then, only then, would Sarah decide what to do with the shattered pieces of her own heart. The party began at 2 o'clock, and Sarah smiled so convincingly that none of the other parents noticed the way her hands trembled when she poured juice, or how she excused herself twice to cry silently in the bathroom, gripping the sink until her knuckles turned white, whispering to her reflection, "Just 3 more hours. You can do this. Just keep her happy for 3 more hours." Mark came downstairs at 1:30, showered and smiling, kissing Emma on the head and squeezing Sarah's shoulder as if everything was normal, as if he hadn't destroyed their family. And Sarah let him play the devoted father, let him lift Emma onto his shoulders for photos, let him pretend, because this day belonged to their daughter, not to their broken marriage. And she would not let him steal that innocence. Not yet, not like this. Emma's eyes shone with pure happiness as she opened presents, each thank you so genuine and sweet that Sarah felt her heart crack wider, thinking about how this child would soon learn that families could fracture, that promises could be broken, that the father she adored had chosen someone else. And Sarah made a silent vow that she would be strong enough for both of them, that whatever came next, Emma would know she was loved unconditionally, completely, forever. The party ended at 5, and Sarah cleaned up while Mark took Emma to return a borrowed table to the neighbors. And in those 15 minutes alone, Sarah packed 2 suitcases, one for her, one for Emma, moving through their home like a ghost, taking only what mattered: photographs, Emma's favorite books, the blanket Sarah's mother had crocheted before she passed, clothes, documents, and the small wooden box where she'd saved every birthday card, every Mother's Day drawing, every "I love you mommy" note Emma had ever written, because those were the treasures worth keeping. Those were the proof that her life had meaning beyond this betrayal. When they returned, Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, the suitcases by the door, her hands folded calmly in front of her, and she said to Mark, in a voice that surprised her with its steadiness, "Emma, sweetheart, go play in your room for a few minutes while Mommy and Daddy talk." And Emma, still buzzing with birthday joy, skipped away humming. "I know about her," Sarah said simply, and Mark's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish drowning in air. And she continued, "I'm not going to fight with you. I'm not going to ask why, or how long, or any of the questions that don't actually matter. Because the truth is simple. You made a choice, and now I'm making mine. Emma and I are leaving tonight, and you can contact me through my lawyer about arrangements." Mark found his voice then, a tumbling cascade of words. "Sarah, please, it's not what you think. I can explain. It was a mistake. I love you. I love our family. Please don't do this. We can work through this." But Sarah held up her hand, and something in her eyes, some new steel that hadn't existed that morning, stopped him mid-sentence. "You're right," she said. "You made a mistake. And I'm sure you do feel sorry. Sorry you got caught. Sorry your comfortable life is about to change. But here's what you're going to do. You're going to let us leave peacefully tonight. You're not going to make a scene. You're not going to upset Emma. And tomorrow you're going to tell her that Mommy and Daddy need some time apart. That it has nothing to do with her. That we both love her more than anything. And you're going to mean that last part, Mark? Because whatever you've done to me, she deserves a father who shows up for her, truly shows up, not just in body, but in heart. She stood then, called Emma down, and said with a bright smile that cost her everything, "Baby, we're going to have a special adventure. Just you and me. We're going to stay at Aunt Rachel's house for a while. Won't that be fun?" And Emma, perceptive in the way children are, looked between her parents with worried eyes, and asked, "Is everything okay?" And Sarah knelt down, cupped her daughter's precious face in her hands, and said, "Everything is going to be okay. I promise. Some things are changing, but you are loved. You are so loved, and that will never change." They drove to Rachel's apartment in silence. Emma, falling asleep in the back seat, clutching her new birthday teddy bear. And when Rachel opened the door and saw Sarah's face, she pulled her sister into an embrace and whispered, "You can stay as long as you need. You're safe here. You're both safe here." And that's when Sarah finally let herself cry. Great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal. The grief of not just a marriage ending but of trust destroyed, of years of memories now tainted, of having to rebuild an entire life she'd thought was solid and real. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Sarah's life. She told Emma the truth in age-appropriate pieces, that Mommy and Daddy loved her, but couldn't live together anymore. That sometimes grown-ups' relationships change. That it wasn't her fault, and never would be. And Emma cried and asked questions that broke Sarah's heart. Did I do something wrong? Will Daddy forget about me? Do you still love each other? And each time Sarah answered with as much honesty and reassurance as she could muster, holding her daughter through the confusion and fear, being the steady presence Emma needed, even when Sarah herself felt like she was drowning. She found a small apartment they could afford on her salary alone. She'd been working part-time as a graphic designer, and now she took on every project she could find, working late into the night after Emma fell asleep, building a client base that could support them, proving to herself that she was capable, that she didn't need Mark's income or his presence to create a good life for her daughter. Mark tried to reconcile at first, sending flowers and apology texts, showing up at Rachel's apartment with tears and promises. But Sarah remained firm, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation, because she'd realized something crucial in those first terrible days. She'd spent years making herself smaller, quieter, more accommodating, trying to be the perfect wife. And in doing so, she'd lost pieces of herself. Had stopped painting, even though it had once been her passion. Had given up friendships because Mark didn't like her spending so much time away. Had learned to gauge his moods and adjust accordingly. And she'd told herself this was love. This was compromise. This was what marriage required. But now, with distance and clarity, she could see it had been a slow erosion of her own identity. And Mark's betrayal, as devastating as it was, had also been an unexpected gift. It had forced her to choose herself, perhaps for the first time in years. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly civil, and they established a custody arrangement where Emma would spend weekdays with Sarah and weekends with Mark. And Sarah insisted on counseling for all of them. Individual sessions for her and Mark to process their own issues, and family sessions to help Emma navigate this new reality. Dr. Patterson, their family therapist, was a gentle woman with kind eyes, who created a safe space for Emma to express her feelings. And during one session, Emma said quietly, "I'm sad they're not together, but Mommy seems happier now." She sings again, and Sarah hadn't even realized it was true until Emma said it. But yes, she had started singing while making breakfast, humming while she worked, finding small joys again in a way she hadn't in years. 6 months after leaving, Sarah enrolled in an evening painting class at the community center. And the first time she stood in front of a blank canvas with a brush in her hand, she felt something unlock in her chest. Some door she'd closed long ago, swinging open again. And she painted through tears that night. Not tears of sadness, but of reclamation, of coming home to herself. She painted Emma's face from memory, capturing the light in her daughter's eyes, the stubborn set of her chin, the sweet curve of her smile, and her instructor, an elderly man named Mr. Chen who'd been teaching for 40 years, stopped by her easel and said softly, "You paint with your whole heart. I can see it. Don't ever stop doing this." Sarah made friends in the class, other women and men seeking creative expression, and she found herself laughing over coffee after sessions, sharing stories, feeling like a person again, and not just a wife or a mother but Sarah, an individual with interests and talents and value independent of anyone else. Emma adjusted better than Sarah had dared hope. She had her difficult moments, nights when she cried for her old life, when she asked why things had to change, but she also showed remarkable resilience, making new friends in their apartment complex, taking pride in decorating her new room, and, most importantly, learning from watching her mother that it was possible to survive heartbreak. That strength wasn't about never falling apart, but about putting yourself back together with grace and determination. 1 year after that terrible birthday, Emma turned 8, and Sarah threw her a party in their small apartment, inviting Emma's school friends and their new neighbors. And as Sarah brought out the cake she'd made, decorated with careful icing flowers, each petal perfect because she'd finally had the peace of mind to make them so, she caught Emma's eye across the room, and her daughter gave her a smile so full of love and trust that Sarah felt her throat tighten with grateful tears, because they had made it. They had survived. They were building something new and good from the rubble of what had been destroyed. Mark came to drop off his present before the party, and for the first time since the separation, Sarah looked at him without anger or pain, just a kind of neutral acceptance, and he said hesitantly, "Sarah, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I destroyed what we had, but I want you to know that I'm in therapy. I'm working on myself, and I see now how badly I treated you, how I took you for granted, how I tried to control you in ways I didn't even recognize at the time, and I'm sorry, truly, deeply sorry. Not because I want you back, I know that ship has sailed, but because you deserved so much better, and I hope you're finding happiness." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. This man she'd loved, this person who had hurt her so profoundly, and she felt something she hadn't expected. Not forgiveness exactly. Not yet, but perhaps the beginning of it. The recognition that he was human and flawed and trying, and that holding on to bitterness would only poison her own life, not his. "Thank you for saying that," she replied quietly. "I hope you find your way to being the person Emma needs you to be. She loves you, and she deserves your best self." And Mark nodded, his eyes wet, and left before the other guests arrived, respecting the boundaries Sarah had set, showing growth of his own. During the party, Rachel pulled Sarah aside and said, "I'm so proud of you, sis. You've not only survived, you've thrived. You're glowing. You're yourself again. Maybe more yourself than I've ever seen you." And Sarah hugged her sister tight, thinking about how this terrible thing had led to so much unexpected growth, how she'd discovered reserves of strength she'd never known she possessed, how leaving had been the hardest and best decision she'd ever made. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat on her small balcony with a cup of tea, looking at the city lights, and thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, standing in that bedroom with frosting on her fingers and devastation in her chest, and she wished she could go back and tell that woman, "You're going to be okay, more than okay. You're going to discover that you're braver than you knew, that you can build a beautiful life from broken pieces, that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary, and that your daughter will learn from watching you that she never has to settle for less than she deserves, that she never has to make herself small for someone else's comfort, that love should expand you, not diminish you. 3 months later, Sarah had her first art show at a local gallery, a small collection of 12 paintings, and Emma stood beside her at the opening, wearing a new dress and beaming with pride, telling everyone who would listen, "That's my mommy. She's an artist." And Sarah sold 6 paintings that night, enough to finally feel like her art could become more than a hobby, could be a real part of her career, her identity, her future. And when Mr. Chen came to see the show, he stood in front of her largest piece, a painting of a woman with her back to the viewer, walking toward a horizon filled with light, a small child's hand in hers, and said, "This is your story, isn't it?" And Sarah nodded, because yes, it was. It was the story of leaving darkness for light, of choosing hope over despair, of rebuilding, of resilience, of love that transcends romantic relationships and roots itself in the deeper soil of self-respect and parental devotion. Emma would sometimes still ask questions about the divorce, processing it in stages as she grew and understood more. And during one car ride home from school, she said, "Mommy, are you glad you and Daddy aren't together anymore?" And Sarah thought carefully before answering, because she wanted to be honest, but not hurtful, and finally said, "I'm sad that things happened the way they did, and I wish Daddy had made different choices. But I'm grateful for where we are now, because I learned that I'm strong, and I get to be the fullest version of myself. And you get to see that being strong doesn't mean never struggling. It means getting back up when life knocks you down." And Emma was quiet for a moment before saying, "I think you're the strongest person I know." And Sarah had to pull over, because tears were blurring her vision. Tears of joy and pain and pride all mixed together. The complicated emotions of a life fully lived. 5 years after that birthday, Sarah was in a relationship again, a healthy one this time, with a kind man named David, who treated her as an equal partner, who encouraged her art, who understood that Emma came first, who showed up consistently and communicated openly. And while Sarah had been terrified to try again, to trust again, she'd learned that Mark's betrayal didn't define all men or all relationships, that healing meant being willing to be vulnerable again, while maintaining the boundaries and self-respect she'd fought so hard to establish. And David never asked her to be anything other than exactly who she was, opinionated, passionate, devoted to her daughter, protective of her time and energy, and scarred but not broken by her past. Looking back, Sarah could see how that terrible birthday had been a crucible, burning away everything false and leaving only what was real and true: her love for Emma, her need for self-expression, her fundamental worth as a human being, independent of anyone else's validation. And while she would never be grateful for the betrayal itself, she was grateful for who she'd become in response to it, for the life she'd built with intentionality and courage, for the example she'd set for her daughter about resilience and self-love. And she knew that sometimes the worst moments of our lives crack us open in ways that let the light in, that force us to grow, that push us toward versions of ourselves we never would have discovered otherwise. And that survival is its own kind of triumph, especially when you emerge not just intact, but transformed, not just functioning, but flourishing, not just existing, but truly, fully, unapologetically alive.